It is April 9th, 2021, lesson 160. I am at home. Fear is a stranger here. And funny enough, I am home, right? And I was listening to my Audible, because usually I like to just kind of crunch all the lessons in one sometimes when I'm traveling. And I remember falling asleep, and then it ended up being the same lesson that I was doing today, so couldn't even do that. So, nonetheless, a little serendipity for myself. The lesson says that fear is a stranger to the ways of love, okay? Because when we identify with fear, right, we become a stranger to ourselves. We become very foreign, alien, right? Because the ego, right, it's very primordial. It thinks that it is the source of all energy. It's been there the longest, right? So it wants to take the seat of God, right? So it's like that whole idea of the house, right, that you let someone live in rent-free, right? So you have to take your place. There can't be two at the same time, right? And it reminds me of this movie with Jim Carrey, Me, Myself, and Irene, where the protagonist, Charlie, creates an alter ego, right? They say you have like dissociative identity disorder, DIDS, split personality, if you want to call it that. And Hank was supposed to be an overcompensation for his grievances, right? Every time that, his wife cheated on him, and he had to raise his black kids, and, the whole, police force was just making fun of him, and he was just a joke, right? So he snapped, right? And then he needed to become this alter ego. And they were fighting the entire time to take control of his body, if you want to call it that. Now, we have to understand that fear is an illusion, right? Because if fear is real, then you're not. So when we allow ourselves to understand that fear is an illusion, right, that's when we become free, because everything we want is on the other side of fear, right? Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's in this realm, whether you're doing entheogens, psychedelics, DMT, you have to be able to let go of your attachment or aversion, right? You're wanting or not wanting fear, so you can break through, if you want to call it that, right? From my experience, only love is the solution, right? So you will see yourself as a stranger, right? You will see yourself as that wounded child or absent adolescent that got kicked out of his house, or what you want to call it, right? And can't find any home, right? So you need to be able to integrate that back. You need to invite that back. And sometimes we make it very difficult for the return to be possible, right? So this last weekend that just passed, I had some of the guys fly in, and they were working with me. We were going out, and there was just something that occurred, because we're trying to understand that we want to be the spirit. We want to be the embodiment of the spirit that is willing to go into the unknown, right? That's what women want from us, right? That's the only reason they would even bother, right? So I had to do something like that, where I needed to go to the darkest parts of my own psyche, right? Because as I see the world, so am I. So I needed to see what was going on, right? So I trusted myself to do some crazy shit. And, afterwards, I had a lot of self-loathing, right? A lot of shame and guilt. And it was very difficult for me to get over that self-loathing, right? I was becoming very insecure, even in my conversations with people. And I didn't know why it was occurring, but I kept releasing on it, and it's like, all right, whatever. And of course, I was doing semen retention, right? Because most oftentimes we find some form of relief by the release that we have when we ejaculate, right? And I was just like, no, I'm just gonna hold on to it as much as I can, whether I was having sex or not. And like it just agitated more and more, right? Because like I was just like just in this depraved state of mind, right? I was just like just lusting and just angry and like prideful, and I was just like doing a whole bunch of things, and I was just like, wow, this is very foreign to me. Like, what is this? And of course that was a part of myself that needed to express itself. So it can be one of two things, right? It could be the ego's watching your true self on the outside of the house, or it could be yourself watching, a split part of your psyche trying to express itself. And again, what you're trying to do is just bring it back home. So it reminded me of what I was watching last night, which was the Netflix special with Ram Dass, I'm Home, I think. It's like 30 minutes. And of course it's like very slow because he's like speaking in sutras. Because, he had a stroke before, he died and everything like that. So he's just like very like slow talking. And he recalls the first time he did mushrooms, and he's like, I'm home, right? And fast forward a couple of years after doing a couple seminars, being a Harvard professor and everything like that, and he meets his guru, Maharaji, right? Someone that emanated unconditional love, because that was the individual that you have to love like Christ, right? You have to love like Christ on the cross. That was his story, right? And it didn't matter what kind of pain it was. It was just like he just loved fully. So that's what you need to do with your own self, right? With these parts that you don't allow yourself to actually love, because it doesn't matter how far you go, right, and veer off in the path. Like, if your heart is with God, then you will consider your own, right? You read this in the Bhagavad Gita, and when you realize that you can't do no wrong, that you can't sin, then you start to see what the real message actually is. Because you see individuals, right, where they live by the sword, die by the sword. We have individuals that are just way beyond, like, sacrificing the future for the present, right? They're not even really living it. They're just, like, seeking attention. They're just, like, losing themselves, right? They're not even finding themselves. You see individuals like DMX who just, went down and died at 50. And it's crazy, right? Because, like, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to wake up. We're trying to, like, understand that, you can't sin. You can't fall. But it's just like society keeps saying that DMX just fell off. I remember doing a presentation on him in 7th grade, and it was just like the craziest thing you ever heard. And my professor was like, what the fuck are you doing? Shout out to DMX, man. Rest in peace. And you have to understand that God knows your heart, right? So that's why they say that, like Hitler could, repent and still go to heaven, because that's really what it is, right? You point to your heart, that's who you are. And I remember, on the way back home, because again, I was going through these, like, moments where I was just relapsing back to my old thought patterns, and I was just like, man, it's so crazy how these thought patterns seem so real. They seem like they're my real thoughts, right? And again, what I hold in mind is the same as I hold in the mind of God, right? And I was just, feeling very serene. I was listening to Stillness Speaks by Eckhart Tolle, and then all of a sudden I was just, like, triggered by something, and for some reason, I don't even know what happened. It was just like a block, and it was just very difficult for me to just break it, and I had to, like, accept that I didn't want, to release, and I had to accept the resistance, and I had to allow it, give it love. And it's like the releasing was just tiring and frustrating, and I was just like, I'm just done with this, right? So I had, like, layers and layers and layers, and it was just like my heart just felt so heavy. I was just like, dude, fuck this. I was working through it, and I accepted it, and I was like, would I rather resist, or would I rather be lighter, happier, freer, right? So I needed to, like, do the polarity releases that I had, And I was just like, man, like, I just, you know, abuse, you know, like, I just felt like I was just like a dog. Like, I was just beat myself up so fucking bad, man. And, like, I realized that, like, I just, you know, I'm starting to love myself a lot more, but, man, like, I'm just so hard on myself. I was like, why, like, if I'm so special, why is this so difficult for me? Like, why do I feel like I'm a piece of shit? Like, why do my parents don't understand me? And, like, it was just like, it's okay. It's okay, you can come home, you know? So, you know, unconditional love is unconditional, right? When you love fully, there's no way you can hurt. And, you know, when you love fully, you don't need to protect yourself. And that's really where it's starting to come down to, especially as you're doing this work, because when I realized that, I was like, oh man, like, I seek a lot of approval, right? And, you know, like, I work through this so fast sometimes, man, and it just feels so lonely because people can't, like, they can't relate. They're not there with me, right? Very few people, you know, of course, there's masters that have gone through the path, and, you know, some people are falling into it, but it's difficult. It's difficult not to, like, feel lonely, because that's what the ego is saying that, right? So you choose either one, right? You choose to let the ego be in the seat, right? You can be Hank, or you can be Charlie, where you allow yourself to, like, know what your true strength is, because Hank is the strength that Charlie actually has. You don't have to change this alter ego. And that's what I started to realize, where, like, I forgave myself, right? It became easier to feel lighter, because I felt what it feels like to be redeemed, right? Because all this time I had been hiding that in the depths of fucking hell, right? So I needed to do that, to realize and trigger what I needed to do to get to the point that I'm having this conversation with you guys, right? And it's crazy, because I tried to film this again, and I didn't even get the fucking, you know, what I wanted to say, which is crazy. But yeah, you know, it became this, like, my house kind of thing. Like, I can't do any wrong, man. And, like, again, when something ceases to bother you, it ceases to exist in the old way, right? Every time that you let go of something, it doesn't come back as strong. So that was the realization today, right? I'm at home, fear is a stranger here, and you have to be able to love that part that you don't, because that's the only way that you can move forward to the next spot. Not the next spot, but the next level, if you want to call it that. It's the only way. Yeah, I could just feel that heaviness in my back now. It's just like this whole responsibility that I have to help people and make sure that I have the right information for people, and, you know, can't embrace imperfection because everything is so fucking intense, and yeah, it's hard on myself, man. Super, super hard on myself. But I recognize that, and I'm okay with that. Why? Because, like, that's my own dedication to myself, right? I'm willing to do that much work for myself, and that's how much I actually love myself. So when you realize that, you're like, wow, all that time I've been doing this, I can really realize why I've been doing this, because this is so well worth it. That's why the present moment is so beautiful, such a blessing, and every moment is designed for the evolution of your consciousness. So, I love you guys unconditionally. Thank you. Non-resistance, non-judgment, non-attachment.